Welcome, everyone. This is Sarah from the Cure SMA Family Support Department. Thank you so much for joining us today. We would also like to thank our national presenting sponsors, Biogen, Genentech, and Novartis Gene Therapies, as well as platinum sponsor Scholar Rock, for their generous support of the Summit of Strength virtual webinar series. We appreciate all of the questions we received in advance of this webinar, and we'll try to answer many of these during the presentation. If you are also able to submit questions through the webinar using the chat box, which you'll find located in your GoToWebinar toolbar. Please note that all lines will remain muted during the webinar other than for the speakers. If you have any additional questions after the presentation and Q&A, please contact the Cure SMA Family Support Team at familysupport@curesma.org. Now we would like to welcome our speaker, Anne Hegberg. Anne is a certified driver rehabilitation specialist and certified driving instructor, and will be presenting today on driving and community mobility. Anne?
Hi, thank you all for joining us. Please do use those questions because it's a little different doing the virtual versus doing it in person. What I want to cover today is community mobility. So that is driving, but it's also safe transportation. It's what do you do about your wheelchair, vehicle considerations, driving preparedness, and then driver rehabilitation. Next slide, please. So the first step is to start with the right equipment. This website has a lot of good information on it. It's through the University of Michigan. They actually crash test wheelchairs, and we're going to talk about that in just a sec. So next slide, please. So WC19 is a crash tested wheelchair. It will have the little symbol that you see over there on the right of the screen that says WC19. The seating systems are crash tested separately, and that's the WC20. So if you're looking at getting a new wheelchair, it's a real good idea to get one that's been crash tested. You're going to have it for a long time. You know, even as, you know, if anytime you're in the vehicle, you should have something that's crash tested if it's available. And on their website, they do say which wheelchairs have been to meet their standards. Next slide, please. So part of WC19 is they have to have four securement points. Some of you, I'm sure, have it on your wheelchairs. I know most of the Permobiles come with it. That means that it can withstand a force of 30 miles per hour, a 20 G impact. Next slide, please. Step 2, after you get the right wheelchair, then is to secure the wheelchair. So there's a couple of different ways to secure the wheelchair. One is what you see on the right, a docking base. Next slide, please. And there's two major companies with docking bases, Easy Lock on the left and Q-Lock on the right. That would be put in a specific location in the vehicle, and the person in the wheelchair then would drive into that position each and every time. The other way to go is what a lot of you probably have. Next slide, please. The 4-point or manual wheelchair securement. There's pros and cons with both. And I live here in Chicago, so getting down on your hands and knees to do the manual wheelchair securement, you can get some pretty wet, cold knees. But there's advantages to that versus the automatic securement. Next slide, please. So the 4-point manual, it's less expensive. You can use it with multiple chairs, and you can use it in multiple positions within the vehicle. So that's why transport companies always use that, because they have to be able to have it positioned different places within the vehicle. The retractable wheels that you see on the bottom are a lot easier than the ones on top with our ratchet. The negative is a wheelchair user cannot independently secure the wheelchair. Someone else has to secure the wheelchair for them. Also, it can be difficult to use correctly. And so because it takes longer to use, what happens is people don't use it all the time. They don't use it for short trips, or they only put on 2 of the straps. or I've seen all sorts of configurations. So it is important to use it correctly. Next slide, please. The docking system can be done independently by wheelchair user. It's easy to use. The bracket is on the bottom. If you look at the bottom right picture, there's a bolt that goes into the V of the docking system, and that's all that needs to happen to secure the wheelchair. So it's very easy to use. A wheelchair user can do it themselves. It's a must for a wheelchair driver. It's easier for caregivers, so it's going to be used more. And that's the big thing. It is more expensive, and it's specific for one user in a specific vehicle. It also, so if the person is always going to be in the right front passenger's area, that's where the docking system would go. The locking pin that's on the bottom of the wheelchair becomes the lowest point of the wheelchair. So it's not that far off the ground. They put it in line with the drive wheels, so when you go up and down little hills, that it does go up and down with the chair. However, if you do a lot of off-road, not off-road, but in the grass, you can pick up some sticks or garden hose, things like that. So you do have to get used to it. Next slide, please. So you got the wheelchair secured, but you still have to secure the rider. Otherwise, all you're doing is having it be like a regular seat in the van with someone not having their seatbelt on. So it's always important to secure the rider as well as the wheelchair. And you can see here that it's not going over the armrest or anything like that. Next slide, please. There's a clear path of travel that allows proper placement of the occupant safety belts next to the skeletal parts of the body. You don't want it going over the armrests. You don't want it going on the neck. And what you can do for that, and that's a problem for a lot of folks, is to use a seatbelt extension, and that changes the angle a little bit so that it's not right on the neck. You can get those on Amazon or a car dealer. They're specific to the vehicle and specific to the position. Sometimes the seat belts in the back of a vehicle are different than the seat belts in the front of the vehicle, which is really goofy, but that's the way it is. Next slide, please. So this is just putting it all together. So you're going to have A, the wheelchair restraints, 2, the occupant securements, and then C is the floor anchorages. All right, next slide, please. So the takeaway, you want to always lock down both the wheelchair and the occupant. If you go to www.travelsafer.org, they have a lot of really great video clips of the crash testing, and it really opens your eyes to what happens even at 30 miles an hour. Next slide, please. Wheelchair and vehicle consideration. So we talked about the wheelchair a little bit. Next slide, please. If you're going to be a driver, it's going to be really important that the wheelchair, the client, and the vehicle all work together. It's a balance. So we need to get the right wheelchair for the right client and the right vehicle. Next slide, please. When you're consider the long-range plans when attaining a wheelchair. So as most of you know, if you're using a wheelchair, 5 to 7 years is pretty maximum before you can obtain a different wheelchair. So the wheelchair that the person gets at age 12 or 13 is the same wheelchair they'll have when they're a teenager and possibly wanting to drive. So you want to look at the long-range goals. If the person transfers, it's not just about getting into the driver's seat, but can they store the wheelchair independently? And also, if they're going to drive from the wheelchair, is it compatible with the automatic lockdowns? Most of the power chairs are, but to be sure, it's best to look it up. The compatibility bracket charts are on both the Easy Lock and the Qstrength websites. They're the two biggest as far as docking stations to secure the wheelchair automatically. And next slide, please. So the vehicle choice, the age of the wheelchair user. If you have someone who's 5 years old or 6 years old and you want to get them transported, you're really probably not too worried about getting a vehicle that they can drive from, because in 10, 12 years when they're going to be driver, you're probably not going to have that same vehicle, or it's not going to be appropriate to adapt it for them for driving. Do they have potential for driving? The size of the wheelchair user is also going to impact the vehicle choice. When they modify the minivans, they can modify them with a 10-inch drop floor or a 14-inch drop floor. If you sit real tall, you're going to want the 14-inch drop so that you can see over the steering wheel and out the windshield. If you're short and you have a 14-inch drop, then you're going to be looking through the steering wheel. And vice versa, if you're real tall and you're in the 10-inch drop, then that's going to be a problem. You'll be hitting your head on the roof of the vehicle. So it's real important to look at those kinds of things. The size of the wheelchair user, as far besides height, is also weight. Luckily, they have increased the weight capacity of the ramps now with the larger wheelchairs and larger people. It used to be only 600 pounds. I say only, but we were exceeding it a lot. Now most of them are 800 or 1,000 pounds. However, if you're buying a used vehicle, it's important to know that, because you don't want to exceed the weight on the ramp. And the passenger capacity needed. If you've got 3 or 4 kids that you're going to be transporting, then it's going to be important that you have the seats, and you may need to look at that. So the passenger capacity is also a consideration when looking at the vehicle. And next slide, please. So vehicle choice, it's very, very important not to purchase a vehicle until you're guided to do so from the DRS. If you do have to purchase a vehicle, consult prior to purchase with a NMETA salesman or a CDRS. NMETA is the National Mobility Equipment Dealers Association, and we'll get to their slide in a second. CDRS is a Certified Driver Rehab Specialist. And you just want to, especially if they're going to be driving age, you want to consult with somebody so that you're not getting something that can't be used for driving. And also don't purchase adaptive equipment, new or used, until you've had the evaluation and it's determined what's going to be best for you. We don't care what kind of equipment. It's not like we get, oh, if you do high tech, then you get more money. No, we don't. But we want to be what's going to work for you. So that's what's really important. I've had people sometimes buy a joystick van off the internet, and they come to me and they say, can you teach me to drive with this? And it's like, well, you don't need a joystick. So it's a balance. And I know sometimes it's real difficult to not buy something, cheaper, but sometimes in the long run, it's better not to. Next slide, please. So consult the experts. And the two National Mobility Equipment Dealers Association are the mobility dealers. They advocate for people needing accessible vehicles. They have QAP standards, quality assurance practices, and they also have a mediation committee. So if you have a problem with an NMETA dealer, you can then actually have a complaint, and others will look at it and get, and deal with that. 24-hour roadside emergency service. If you're an NMETA dealer, you have to have that. Just recently, they've added a list of crash-tested vehicles, both NMETA member manufacturers and also non-NMETA manufacturers. So that's a nice thing that they've just added within the last few months. ADIT is the Association for Driver Rehab Specialists, and those are therapists and driver educators for people needing driver rehab services. They are the credentialing body for the Certified Driver Rehab Specialist. They also have on their website, you can by state look and see who is a CDRS or DRS in your area. Just note, not all programs are the same. Excuse me. All right, next slide, please. The minivan. I'm sure most of you have seen these minivans. They take out the middle seat, so you just have a front driver's seat, passenger seat, and the back seat. You can take out the driver's seat and the passenger seat, remove those, and you can have a wheelchair then fit in those areas. There's a lot of considerations as far as that goes. One of the biggest questions I get asked a lot is, can you move the driver's seat over to the passenger area? One company is saying that they endorse that now. That would be BMI. Braun is saying, no, they do not endorse that. So that's a good question to ask if that's important for you for like long trips or something like that, where, you know, driver A is going to drive and then switch with driver B. So that's just something to, you know, kind of be aware of. Next slide, please. This is a companion van. It's a manual door and ramp versus the other van that is a power door, power ramp, and a kneel system. And the kneel system actually lowers the vehicle so that the ramp is not as steep of a curve. And that's real important if you're in a manual chair. If the angle of the ramp is too steep, then you're not going to be able to get up the ramp safely. And next slide, please. Another option is the rear entry minivan. I think probably everybody listening has had the issue of somebody parking in the yellow stripes right next to you, and then you have difficulty as far as getting in and out of your vehicle. This solves that problem. There's a couple issues. So one is when you go in forward, and so then you're backing out and typically then backing out into the aisle of the grocery store. So that could be a danger. The other thing, next slide, please. If you look at this, you can see that only the center area is modified. You can see there's kind of a step up to where the driver and passenger seats are. That means that it cannot be used for a driver. When someone's driving from the chair, they have to have the floor lowered in the driver area too. So this would not be a good solution for somebody who has a teen, maybe not driving, but maybe you're thinking they would be driving in the near future. And so this wouldn't be a good solution for that. Next slide, please. Just recently, some of you may have known the Ford Explorer by Braun. They discontinued it this year because Ford went to all-wheel drive and Braun was unable to adapt the all-wheel drive version of the Explorer. So they came out with the Chevy Traverse from Braunability. It is new out, and so you can talk to your local dealer and see if they have it. In the SUVs, that does get limited room because they are smaller than the minivans, but a lot of people, especially, you know, the younger folks, don't want a minivan. The other one is the Honda Pilot, put out by VMI, and Braunability and VMI are the two big manufacturers of lower floor vehicles. The Honda Pilot, though, is not automatic, and so it's for transport only. So again, it would not be one for a driver. And next slide, please. Driver preparedness, are you ready? And next slide. Okay, so students with disabilities, at our facility, we see people from age 15 to in their 90s. And what we have found is that students with disabilities a lot of times haven't had to interact with traffic. Their visual systems haven't had to interpret information faster than wheelchair speed. And so it can be difficult when you put them behind the wheel and it's like, okay, let's get going. Also, bike riding is another thing that a lot of folks with disabilities haven't been able to do. They're short stature, so they're not able to actually see what's going on in traffic. They're sitting in the back seat or not paying attention to driving. And that goes not just with students with disabilities, but a lot of teens are not paying attention at all to driving, what their parents are doing, how they're interacting, where they're going, those kinds of things. So it's real important. Next slide, please. Any kind of activity you can do that gets you out there and moving, be it go-karts, lawn tractor, golf carts, that's great. You know, you have to handle it. If you can't handle something like that, you know, maybe you need adaptive equipment. If it's a visual problem, then that's another issue. Next slide, please. So we always recommend to do pre-driver activity. Sit in the front seat. If you're in a wheelchair and you've got a minivan, take that front passenger seat out and secure the person in the front passenger so that they can have an increased awareness of the driving environment, identifying signs, signals, potential hazards, and so you're doing the visual and the cognitive, but not the physical handling of the vehicle. And improve concentration. So you start out with just like, okay, you pick out all the stop signs that are R's, you know, and how long can the student pay attention? And then it's stop signs and yield signs. Then it's, you know, all traffic signs. And then it gets to the point you say, okay, we're going to Target. Which way should I pull out of the driveway? You know, and the student then would have to say, okay, go this way, and then we're going to make a left turn, so you're going to have to change lanes, and then, okay, it's clear to go, so that they're judging the gap. So it's all those kinds of things, which really, really helps with the pre-driving. Then when they get behind the wheel, it's not so foreign to them. Alrighty, next slide, please. We're 50 states, but different states have different laws as far as age and vision requirements. I'm in Illinois. Our state requires driver's education for Illinois for any students under 21, and it is provided in the high school. That is not so in a lot of states, that either they don't require driver's ed or it's not provided in the high schools. So those are important things to know. And what accommodations are allowed. Some states will not allow you to drive from a manual wheelchair. Some states have other, you know, stricter laws for those with disabilities. You have to make a specific appointment and go through a specific person. So it's good to know what your laws and requirements are in your state. Next slide, please. So the in-vehicle training, we see a lot of people, high school students, and they're 15 or 16 and they're ready to go, and the high school says, well, we'll pay for, you know, 8 lessons or whatever. But even if they pay for 30 lessons, if it's not feasible to obtain an adapted vehicle, it doesn't make sense to do the training. Especially with a new driver, that means that they're not able to practice. When you're in regular driver's ed, you have your lessons, but then you practice at home with mom or dad. So you want to do it when it makes sense that to get an adapted vehicle. The cost, you have the training cost, the cost of the adaptations, the vehicle itself, the insurance, maintenance and upkeep. A lot of the folks I see with SMA, I see them when they're in high school, and then it's like, okay, let's wait until you can fund yourself. And, you know, they come back out of high school or when they're done with college. Funding, next slide, please, is a big issue. All states have state vocational rehab services and funding for mobility to school or work. It varies a lot by the states. Some of them are very good. Their whole thing is to get you working so you're not sitting at home. So that's great, but they're not going to pay for everything. They may pay for the eval and training and the adaptations. They don't pay for the chassis, the actual vehicle itself. They're not going to pay for the insurance. So if you have a $120,000 vehicle for a 16-year-old, the insurance is going to be high. They can't charge more because you have a disability. However, it's a $120,000 vehicle with a 16-year-old driving it, it's going to be high. The other thing is upkeep. These things, if you don't keep up with them, they're going to give you problems, and that can be a real safety concern. Various school districts in some areas will cover the cost of training. That's variable. Various organizations, we've had people come through like with the Elks Club or the MS Society to help with some of the cost. And I've had some students go through GoFundMe. The biggest one, I'd say 90% of the folks I see are probably through the state vocational rehab services and a few through workman's comp. Okay, next slide, please. Driver rehab, what to expect? Not all programs are created equal. To be a certified driver rehab specialist, you do not have to be an occupational therapist. You can be a driver educator, but take the test. So you want to find out, who is the person from this program? Are they occupational therapists? Are they certified driver rehab specialists? Are they certified driving instructors? What is their vehicle situation? Do they have a van? If you need to drive a van, you should not get tested and trained in a car. That makes no sense. Do they have experience with clients with SMA? We're fortunate here. We do have a high-tech vehicle, and we've had a lot of folks with SMA. Other people, not so much. We're the only high-tech van in Illinois. That's a big population. I'm in Chicago. There is no other one. They're very few and far between. So I would recommend calling and talking to the program, find out what they have, where you can get it. You don't want to go someplace and pay for an eval only to find out that they can't meet your needs. And next slide, please. So the evaluation itself, we talked to the teen and the parent about motor development, management of self in the community. Are you able to cross the street by yourself? Do you stay home alone for periods of time? If we're talking driving, then the person's going to be, theoretically by themselves. And that's not always feasible for folks in wheelchairs. So we've got to look at both, are they able to stay home alone? And if not, is that because the parents don't feel comfortable, or is it because it's a safety issue? Readiness for driving. Even now, a lot of able-bodied or neurotypical kids aren't ready for driving. When you think about the driver, they're 16 or so. That's too early for a lot of people to drive. Next slide, please. So the driver evaluation, basically, we're going to look at the vision, cognition, and motor function are the three basic things. We'll first do it in the clinic with the OT, and then we do the behind the wheel part. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at the progression of the SMA. Is it a slow progressing? Is it quicker progressing? What kind of medical precautions? Any other comorbidities? Can't say that. Comorbidities. Medical precautions, medications that you're on. So the medications, in the case of somebody with ADD, we would want them to take their medications for driving. Somebody who the medication relaxes them so much that they aren't functional for driving, we would want them not to take the medications. And then there's also how the medications interact. Patient goal, is it just to drive around town? Is it to do long distance driving? What is the patient's goal? And then driving history. Has this person driven before? Have they driven with adaptive equipment before? Is it just a replacement vehicle of the same thing they already have? And so we want to know the person's driving history. Also, we want to know how accidents and tickets and things like that. So we want to get a full picture of the person. Next slide, please. Vision. Vision is so important for driving that 90 to 95% of inputs are via the visual system for driving. So we'll look at acuity, but we also look at binocular vision, like depth perception, peripheral or side vision. And some states have requirements for that. Not all states do. Far and near acuity, far acuity, all the states have some kind of some standard, but the standard is not the same in all states. And then visual motor skills. And the visual motor skills are tracking. So can you track an object without moving your head? Are you able to move your eyes up and down like you do to the rear view mirror, up and then back down, and do it quickly? And that's real important when doing lane changes. You don't want to be staring at the mirror and then you lose your place. Next slide, please. Perception. So figure ground and spatial relations, visual memory. So visual memory, if you see there's a truck behind you, do you remember that when you come up to a traffic light and it's yellow and you're going to stop? Do you remember there's a truck behind that maybe couldn't stop? Processing time is huge. You know, if it takes you too long to process the information and to react, that can be a real problem with driving. Next slide, please. It's estimated for every 1 mile driven, there are 20 decisions that need to be made in less than a half a second to react. So for those of you out there who are already drivers, you can think about it. You know, you're going 1 mile, but you have to watch for other drivers. You have to watch possibly for road signs for where you're going. You have to watch for turn signals and brake lights and lane placement. So there's a lot of decisions that need to be made and you don't have long to make it. Next, please. We also look at cognition, person's attention, their ability to problem solve, their judgment, impulsivity. The front part of the brain isn't mature until age 23 to 25, they say now, and we're having people drive at 16. So it may be that the person's just not mature enough yet to drive. You know, are they impulsive? So those kinds of things we look at. We have standardized tests that we use for that. And next, please. Sensorimotor, we're looking at the range of motion and we want to know what you can do easily. We don't want somebody holding their breath and stretching their back in order to lift up their arm because that's not going to be functional in the vehicle. So we want to look at what is the range of motion you're comfortable with that you can do for longer periods of time. You have the endurance, you have the strength, coordination. With past folks I use with SMA, a lot of times, you know, they have the coordination in the hands as long as the forearms, the elbows are supported. So that's what we need to do in the vehicle. Next slide, please. Behind the wheel eval, we use a standardized route. If somebody is a new driver or a driver with new adaptive equipment, then we stay on the grounds. We're not expecting the person to know everything, but we're looking to see basically, you know, can they stay on the road? How are they adapting? Are they able to stay in their lane, not go in the grass or hit curbs? All those kinds of things. Next slide, please. So we're basically looking at all the physical aspects of driving. We're looking to see, can they do this OEM or original equipment manufacturer, or do they need some kind of adaptive devices? And next slide, please. So we want to see how they can get in the vehicle, be it a minivan with a fold-out ramp. Next slide, please. And with that, I want to make sure the person can go up and down that ramp regardless of the weather. This was a very cold day. You can tell by the puffy jacket. And so I want to make sure the person can go up and down that, you know, regardless of the weather. Next slide, please. And then behind the wheel, we're looking at acuity, depth perception, all those kinds of things, judging distance, shifting focus, looking at the mirror without drifting. Next slide, please. Cognition, we're looking at everything. Again, now, if somebody has not driven before, we're not, you know, this is their first time driving. First off, we're only going to do it in a very limited amount. We're not as concerned about defensive driving and laws and signs and things like that, as long as they stop at the stop sign. So we want to look at all of those kinds of things in cognition behind the wheel. And next. Driving controls. The primary controls, and that's what we're looking at for the evaluation, is that it changes the speed or direction of the vehicle. Steering, gas, and brake. Next slide, please. There are mechanical hand controls. They can be put on the left side or the right side. And for all mechanical hand controls, you have to brake forward towards the dash to brake. So you would push into your arm into extension. The acceleration then can be a pull back, a rocking motion, a push down, or a twist. And so it's what the therapist does is look at all those things and see what's going to be the best for you. Do you have the strength to do that? The next step then, next slide, please, is the high tech, which is all electronic controls. And so it looks a little daunting, but over on the right side, there's a little steering wheel. Up above that is the controls for the ignition, the gear shift. You can see that the seat's taken out. Next slide, please. And that's a joystick that's used for gas, brake, and steering. And then we have the gear shift right there so the person can get that. The person on the left is using a small steering wheel. It's about the size of a dessert plate. You need about 3 ounces of strength to be able to move it. So the problem with that is you have to move it for every 1 rotation of the regular steering wheel. It's 2 rotations of the small wheel, but it's not much pressure needed or strength. Next, please. We also have to look at the secondary controls, and those are all the controls that you do while in motion. The turn signals, wiper, horn, dimmer, cruise. We use the little blue, it's called digitone mainly. It's a soft touch button, do it with your elbow or do it with a finger, and then it activates the different controls, signals, wiper, etc. Next, please. And then this is the brain of the thing. You can see it's just a touchpad. It's got the gear shifter, it's got the mirror adjustment, lights, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, windows, wipers, the whole 9 yards on that. And so that would go in with the high-tech system, but it can also be broken down. You might not need all that. Maybe you only need a power shifter and you can use mechanical hand control. So we can mix and match depending on exactly what you specifically would need. And next slide, please. All right, I am out in the car a lot, so the best way to get a hold of me is my email, and that's up there, and I will get back to you. Might not be the same day, but please feel free. And then I think there were a couple questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Anne. Thank you for such a great and informative presentation. Hi, everyone. This is Jessica from the Family Support Department at QRSMA, and we'd now like to move in and address some of the questions that have come in from our community. Our first question, Anne, is in regards to an individual who has gone through the driving process and became nervous making turns and increasing the vehicle to the speed limit. Have you witnessed changes in the programs to allow for more time to get used to driving so that the driver is as comfortable as possible on the road?
Yeah, unfortunately, it tends to be up to what the payer source. We see people for 30 to 40 hours with the high-tech equipment. We do a fitting at the mobility dealer, then we do follow-up training, because I want that person to be comfortable. My standard is, would I put my grandchild in the back seat with that person? But if the funding source is only going to pay for 10 lessons or 20 lessons, then yes, you would be uncomfortable. I've had good luck with SMA clients. The biggest roadblock has been cost as far as for the training and the equipment. So I would tell that person to go ahead wherever they were trained and see if they can get some more training, because they should be able to do the speed limit.
Great, thank you. Thanks for addressing that. Our next few questions, they go kind of hand in hand, and they all relate regarding mobility. So first, what level of mobility is needed to be able to drive? For example, if an individual only has enough strength to control a joystick.
Yeah, no, there is joystick systems out there. The one I showed is EMC. That's the system I have. I've had the same system for the last 10 years. It's still working. Other systems are out there. They're coming in from Europe. It depends on basically where you go for the evaluation and what systems they have. There's not a whole lot of joystick systems out there, so you may have to travel a ways to get to one. like I said, we have one. There are other places that have one. You can also do a dual joystick, so you have one hand doing the gas and brake with the joystick and the other one doing the steering, or the small steering wheel also is an option. So with the joystick, yes, the problem gets to be that it can cost $100,000 or so for the equipment alone, not counting the cost of the chassis, the vehicle, just to make the wheelchair, to make a minivan wheelchair adaptable, brand new, you're looking at $50,000 to $60,000. And then the cost of the equipment on top of that would be another 70, 75, maybe more.
Thank you. And then kind of going along with that too, do they have the technology for someone who has of one arm?
I'm sorry, you kind of cut out there, but I think you asked if somebody has just one arm. Yeah, they can drive. In fact, the picture I showed in one of the slides is a gal who is a quadruple amputee, and she has no hands and no legs at all. And she ended up being able to drive. So there's a lot of technology out there. It's a matter of getting an evaluator who knows what they're doing and getting the right equipment. Like I said, it's spread out. So you have to find what's going to work best for you.
Great, thank you so much. And I know you touched on this for our next question in regards to cost and purchasing conversion vans with those different state and charitable organizations. Is there a resource that or a link you can direct people to kind of look for these different programs that are available to them to help with the costs?
The best is the state vocational rehab, so that's going to be individual to your state. They call them different things. In Wisconsin, it's workforce department. In Illinois, it's Department of Human Services, Office of Rehab. So that would be the best as far as I've seen as far as funding. That the VA does have a funding system too, but that is only for vets.
Perfect. And then finally, in regards to costs, I know the range can be quite a bit. Can you give any kind of range of costs for the vans?
Yeah, the vans you're looking at probably 50 to 60,000. The equipment, if it's high tech, well, if it's low tech, you're looking maybe hand controls and a spinner knob. You're looking at a lockdown system under 10,000. It's the more electronics you get, the more expensive it's going to be. And so I've seen them, top out with the vehicle at like 125,000 sometimes.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Anne, for taking the time to answer all these great questions that came in, and then again for your presentation as well. We really appreciate you being here with us today.
Most welcome.
We appreciate everyone who has joined in on this webinar today. You'll be receiving a follow-up email with a survey link, and we welcome any feedback that you have to share with us. We are also thankful for the incredible support from our sponsors for making the Summit of Strength virtual webinar series possible. If there is anything that we can do for you, or if you have any additional questions, please email us at familysupport@cursma.org. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.